and other corporate videos and stuff like that. We want to create a course that will show you how to do DIY food photography. This isn't for a big studio, big flash and light setup. This is for you at home to just pull resources that you have at home or at a local craft store using natural light to make your food photography look super professional. We're gonna start our lessons with picking out the ideal location in your house to shoot food. We're then gonna talk about settings and trying to bring out those accents and what kind of utensils to use for your style and your looking food. After that, we're gonna go into lighting techniques, how to control ambient and natural light. After that, we're gonna talk about cameras and the difference between iPhone and phone cameras versus bigger professional and smaller mirrorless cameras. And then we're also gonna check out how to compose the best shot with your camera. After all that's done and said, we're gonna go ahead and talk about how to naturally edit your food photography and have it be as natural and as crisp and vibrant as possible. So if you're ready, let's get started. So the first big thing is finding a location. Now I'm gonna kind of jump ahead. In food photography, what I've kind of learned and been taught, and you'll hear this a lot, is that lighting is king. Because we want to make this a DIY course, we're going to focus on completely natural light. We're not going to use any artificial flashes or strobes or anything like that. So our location is very dependent on natural light. You don't want to have really, really harsh shadows because you'll start to see differences in food and it'll look not as natural and appetizing and all that. So a lot of food photography, depending on your style, is done with very soft, diffused light. Imagine the sun coming in really, really hard and it's just really bright and it creates this deep, deep shadow. Diffused light is like basically putting a white bed sheet in front of that sun and spreading the light out so it's nice and soft and easier on shadows. That being said, shooting inside is much easier than shooting outside where there's this harsh sun. Now again, what's easier in finding natural light is just finding a really nice window where there's light coming in. We want to find a window where we're going to get less hard light throughout the day. Now, that being said, we're in Southern California, in Los Angeles, and we would want to aim for kind of a north-facing window because that will be a consistent light throughout the day. If we face west, the light's going to get brighter as the sun starts to set. It might start poking through. If we have an east-facing window, we might start to lose light throughout the day as the sun kind of moves over. Depending where you are in the world, this may change, and it also may change based on the weather and things like that. Today's kind of a cloudy day, so a lot of the light coming into Phil's apartment is very diffused, so we kind of got lucky with that, but you kind of just want to be cautious. So I'm here in Phil's kitchen. Kitchen is obviously where you kind of want to start looking for your window, mostly because this is where the food's going to be, and you can potentially use the kitchen as a background as opposed to creating your own background, which might look nice later. So let's take a look. There's really only one big set of windows right here. They've got blinds in them. The sink is right here, which is kind of a bummer. I think if the sink weren't here, this might be a really nice spot to shoot. These don't open, it looks like, because this is here. I also know that that's east. So if we start shooting this direction, I know that the sun is going to be moving away from us here, so it's going to get darker as the day goes on. I'd like it to stay as consistent as possible. So there's a big window over there in the dining room area, so let's go check that out. So this window is great. That way's north, so we've got our north-facing window. It's pretty big. Having a bigger source is nice. It'll cover a bigger area. The kitchen is back there, which I just came from, so I can shoot from this way and have depth. Or if I wanted to, I can shoot from this way and create a background. Cloudy outside, we're in Southern California. Often it's not that cloudy, but we got some nice diffused light. If I wanted to diffuse this more, I can hang up a sheet. So this is great. So let's get a table that we can now set in front of here at this height at the bottom of the window, and we can get started with our next lesson. Oh, that's nice. Okay, so let's talk about prepping your food and your setting. The big thing here is to kind of make sure that your food doesn't look alone and we kind of busy it up with a story. And so that means like accenting it, adding some depth when we start to shoot. Everything here we found at Phil's apartment. So that's a big thing for us today, right? We're just kind of using what's available without having to go out and spend money, but still creating something that looks nice. At your home, you may have a different style, so everything may look a little different. The big thing is to kind of find things that are gonna work with the dishes that you're gonna be showing. We're gonna start with a bunch of different dishes, but for this lesson, we're gonna be making a salad, shooting the salad throughout, and then we'll shoot a bunch of other stuff. So everything you see here is what we'll be using in most of our configurations. We may add some other things that we find. Let me show you some examples of what we've got here and what we found around the house. We found this nice wood cutting board that he's got. It's got some nice grain and texture. Along with the table we found, it is a small table, but it's what we got. So we've got two types of wood that we can shoot on. In addition to that, we found some silverware that's very shiny. Maybe we'll make a milkshake or put a beer on it later. We found some limes and lemon that we can use to add some color to some of the shots depending. Maybe we'll do margarita, I don't know. We found some really cool looking wood coasters that we use. We can kind of spread these out. Maybe they'll be out of focus. The key again is texture. We found these really cool salt and pepper shakers. I mean, we found them, they're on his dining room table. But I think they have a nice shine to the light. You can kind of see how reflective they are. These are some napkins that Phil just had in his house. Again, it's something that you want to use that works cohesively with your story and what you're trying to tell. Okay, so let's get into setting our setting here. We've got our salad that Phil created with some toast on the side. Basically, we're going to place this down and figure out what looks the best around this particular food item for you playing at home. Go ahead and take your dish, whatever it may be, and just try to basically design a world around it that tells a story and applies itself. Phil and I are obviously not world-renowned chefs. So what the key thing to do here is just make your food look as presentable as possible and as clean as possible. So let's go ahead and figure this out. I'm gonna go ahead and place this down. I think we're gonna stick with this wood board because I really like the texture. And let's see what makes sense here. We will take out the milkshake spoons and probably take out the knife. Just put this aside here. Obviously the lemon isn't really fitting as well. So let's take the lemon and limes out. Save those for something else. Tomatoes look good. The oil and vinegar also look good. Again, I'm shooting this direction. The light's coming in this way. And we want to create kind of a sense of background, a sense of texture, everything that we can do to kind of just tell a story, create an atmosphere, and just really kind of try to accent everything that's happening on the dish itself. So I'm using the kitchen as sort of a background, but also using this setting as a background. When we shoot from this angle, we won't have or need a background. Whereas when we're shooting this angle, it just depends on the type of food that you're shooting. The salad, it's a little bit different. We'll get more into that in compositions. You can pick out a little color here of napkin just to kind of set the scene. I think I'm gonna go with this. I don't wanna overpower the salad. The yellow would probably overpower it. This is a little more diffused, so let's go ahead and use that. Make it as presentable as possible. Yeah, it looks nice. And then we'll take a fork, put it there. And again, I don't want to focus on these things. Like they're going to be out of focus, but I just want to add atmosphere, story, make it look appetizing. This looks like a nice place where I could sit down and have a meal. So one thing real quick on the salad and the white dish, we kind of selected a white dish and that's kind of typical practice. I mean, you can probably tell most professional restaurants are going to be serving things on white dishes really to accent the color of the food. And so it doesn't get lost in like a dark or black dish. The cool thing about this also is when we put it on our wood and put it in our setting, it really does separate the food itself from the background. It's kind of like having a white canvas with colorful painting. So white dishes are really nice and they also look great with really diffused soft light. So again, the idea here is to create a photograph that's really going to be appetizing and kind of warm and inviting. You can see really quickly if I just pull some of this stuff to the side, just a plain plate, it's pretty, like it's a nice salad, but it really isn't, you know, it's not inviting. It's not like, hey, I come sit down for dinner and join us. Whereas as soon as I start to add things, it really is more of a setting place for you to kind of be invited to and have friends over. You know, it's sort of a nice invitation sort of thing. I know that's a little silly to say, but you can kind of tell this is much more inviting, more homey, less sterile. It's much more inviting. It's like, hey, come sit down and enjoy it, a nice meal. And that's what you want to do with your photographs, right? You want them to be appetizing. You want them to be inviting. You want someone to look at it and be like, yeah, I'd sit down and eat that salad. So now you can see that all of this together in this nice storytelling atmosphere, it's more inviting, it's more sit down and enjoy this salad. There are plenty of other styles of settings. You know, it could be you know, a different type of wood, it can be a different type of food. The idea here is to just create your style and have it be as appetizing and as inviting as possible. So that's this lesson. We're going to move on to how to light next. So lesson 3 is all about lighting. Now lighting is really dependent on the kind of style that you're going for. For these purposes, we're going for a natural, kind of inviting style, which is typically the norm. You can go into a darker, more contrastier, night life kind of style, but we're sticking to natural light and very soft light coming in. So in order to do that, we have our north-facing window, which is going to keep our light consistent all day, which is going to let us shoot. We're not going to get any harsh lights coming in from the sun. Everything is diffused. In this particular place, there's actually a white building outside there, and the sun's hitting it, which is bouncing even more light in. So for us, it's kind of nice having this really calm light. On a cloudy day, it would be just as nice and having some nice soft light in. We're going to play with 2 different types of diffusion and 2 different types of bouncing light and negative fill. So let's start off with just the regular light that we got right now. Let's see what we got. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll talk more about camera composition later. I'm going to go ahead and take a shot right now. I'm at a 2.8 ISO 400 and I'm shooting at 125th of a second. We'll get more into camera stuff in the next lesson. But for now, here's our shot. It's a pretty nice, even lit, soft light because of the window. Now let's add a sheet. What I'm going to do is just a very basic, again, stuff that you can find in your house, white bed sheet to diffuse the light even more. What I'm doing is just hanging it up to cover the entire window. And this is going to allow the light to still come in, but it's going to keep it softer. So now the light's diffused even more. We're going to keep the same settings on our camera. There. And so now you can see, going back between the 2, one is a little bit brighter, has the shadows a little harsher, you can see under the plate, and the other one, it's a little bit softer. It's also a little bit darker because we didn't adjust our shutter. We're just going to open up a little bit with the shutter, take another shot, and now you can see the difference between the 2. You can see they're still around the same brightness, but the light is a little bit more diffused and a little bit softer. Another thing that happens because of the sheet is the color temperature has changed just a little bit. And so you can correct that later, or you can kind of decide what kind of lighting that you want. I think for this one, I would probably go with the diffused light because it just looks a little warmer, it looks a little softer, it looks a little more inviting. It's just a nice, vibrant kind of idea. If we want to add a little bit more contrast, I'm going to add some neg fill, which means I'm going to keep the light coming from over here and trying to like shape some kind of darker sides on the contrasty side, on the right side, and that'll allow for some more shape and more sort of contrast within the food itself. So for that, we went and bought a $1 black foam core, and basically it's really just to suck up the light coming from the other side of the room. Depending on where you're shooting, there's no real close wall on that side for this light to bounce off of, so this isn't going to do much, but depending on where you are, you can take this and get it as close as you can to the food without actually getting it in your shot. And I'm just doing it by hand right now until I get into my frame, and then I'm going to back out, and I'm going to go ahead and take a photo with the same settings and take it away. And now you can look at your difference between photo and other photo. There's just a little tiny bit of darkness in it that adds a little bit more contrast that I think looks a little bit more professional. Notice on the fork, if you go back and forth, the fork has added this nice dark layer of contrast, and also it adds a little bit more shadow coming in the background and on the napkin, which I think looks way more professional. So let's go ahead and figure out a way to fix that so we can take a real shot. So what I'm doing now is I'm just using a chair that we have in the apartment to basically figure this out. And basically, this is around the spot that I put it at, and it's basically adding this contrast that we talked about. I'm gonna get a piece of tape from here to here, and it's gonna lock it down. I'm gonna put that tape there, put that tape there. This is very DIY rudimentary. This thing's very light. A little piece of tape like this goes a long way. And now we take our shot. And great. So that darkness is still there, the contrast is still there compared to our shot beforehand, which is a little bit brighter and a little bit less contrast. Again, this is style preference. So another thing, if you wanted to make it brighter, is that you can add a bounce card. Depending on how much light is coming in, basically you replace the black with a bounce white card to add in some more light. So the only reason I would use this is if we didn't have enough light coming in and you wanted to light the front a little bit more. We're in a pretty ambient room, so it's gonna be kind of hard to show you this, but with the bounce card, you can kind of see that I would take this and try and bounce this light onto here to kind of add some more brightness and some even lighting. So again, I'll put it right here and take our shot. This bounce card will basically fill out the shadows on the other side of the food, so it'll be less contrasty and more even. This style is, something that you may like more than the contrasty style, but check it out. Look at how dark and contrasty it is with the black fill versus the positive white light coming in as the bounce card fills in. This is really just tools for you. If we were to take down the white sheet and use the bounce or change any sort of configuration, you'll be able to achieve different styles. So really playing around with that and finding what you like the most is really gonna help define your food photography and the way you like to shoot. So that's lighting. It's very basic DIY bounce and soft lighting, very quick, I know. If you have any questions, feel free to ask us and we'll get back to you. We now want to move on to what kind of cameras you're using. Right now I've been using a mirrorless camera, but let's talk about iPhone and phone cameras versus professional and prosumer cameras. Okay, so what kind of camera are you going to be shooting your food with? I wanted to talk about this because I know a lot of people want to use their phones or their smaller cameras or their point and shoots, so I kind of wanted to talk about the difference between the two. Now obviously the quality of an iPhone or any sort of mobile phone will be different than a larger, more professional or prosumer camera. The camera I'm using right now is a mirrorless Fuji X-T1 with a 56mm lens. I have right here an iPhone 6 Plus. And I just kind of wanted to show you the differences in look. The big thing with professional looking photography is the depth of focus and the ability to control the exposure and see into contrast, basically seeing light versus dark. With a lens, an interchangeable lens, you're going to be able to create that depth of focus much more easily than you would with a phone. Now let's look really quick at the same compositional shot from a phone versus a mirrorless camera. So you've already seen sort of our shots from our mirrorless camera, so let's go ahead and take a shot again, just so you have reference. This is with the black negative fill that we talked about in lighting over our salad that we created with our kind of look. Now let me move the mirrorless camera away, and then we'll go ahead and try and shoot the same shot with an iPhone. So if we stand right here, right away we can see we're too wide. So we're gonna go ahead and zoom in and get the same similar shot that we had before. So right away I'm sacrificing the quality and the pixels of the camera on the phone because I'm zooming in so much. So let's zoom out and see if we can get full frame and get closer. It's a little bit harder because of our placement of our card, so I would move our card back, but let's just take a shot here for now just to see, and we can crop it later. So you can see on the iPhone, the shot's pretty much all in focus. There's not a lot of depth of field, there's not a lot of shallowness. Whereas the mirrorless Fuji shot with the prime lens and the 2.8 aperture, which is the aperture of the phone, adds this depth of focus that really looks more professional and more high quality. So you can create a great shot with your phone, and you can also create an even better, more professional looking shot with a mirrorless or DSLR camera with an interchangeable lens. I feel like if you're trying to maximize that professional quality look, you're gonna wanna go with the photography camera, like the camera that's meant to do photos as opposed to a phone that has a camera on it. Other aspects of it would be the actual digital file. Megapixels on these cameras, on the bigger professional cameras, will get you more space in editing later, which we can talk about, having looks into the shadows and pulling back the whites and all that, versus a phone, which is much harder to have that dynamic range and be able to color and edit as much as possible. So those of you who are using mirrorless or DSLR cameras or a camera where you can adjust manual settings, let me really quick just go over the settings that I use for exposure. So the three settings that you always want to pay attention to, and this is some basic photography, are ISO, aperture, and shutter. So all of those we're going to use to create the exposure that we want. Again, exposure is going to end up on your specific style and the lighting, darker if you like, brighter if you like, depending on which way you're going. ISO is where we'll start. So depending on your camera, you may want to adjust your ISO, and that meaning sensitivity of how sensitive your camera is to the light coming in. So I'm gonna be able to shoot around 200, 400 with this camera, which is where I like. The bummer part about ISO is if it's darker and you start bumping up your ISO, the grain is gonna start coming up, which isn't always nice to look at. So depending on your camera, you wanna aim at an ISO where you'll get enough light in, but you'll also not see too much grain, because that'll start to look not as clean and as sharp. The next setting you wanna look at is your f-stop, or your aperture. Now this is kind of another style choice. It's probably one of the ones that I adjust the most, but the lower the f-stop number, which means the bigger the hole that the light comes in, the more that will be out of focus. So if you shoot wide open, if your lens can open up to a 1.4 or 1.2, more things will be out of focus and less things will be in focus. So if you're shooting food, I tend to aim around a 2.8 because I do like that nice soft background. I don't want to open up to a 1.4. This lens will go to a 1.2. It might be a little nutty and some of the food might not end up in focus. You can kind of tell already that in our shot, the toast is totally out of focus. F-stop's really kind of where you want to look at as far as what's in focus and what's out of focus and your specific style. Again, I'm aiming for a 2.8 at ISO 400. The third thing is the shutter. Now that kind of depends on what you're doing. It's nice to have a tripod because we can kind of aim at it and set up our composition and let it sit there and walk back and forth as opposed to bringing your hands up every time. So your shutter is really going to be the one that you're adjusting the exposure to. Pick your ISO, pick your f-stop, now pick your shutter depending on if you're using a tripod or not. We've been shooting at a 60th of a second, which is kind of slow, but because we're on a tripod, we're able to shoot as low and as high as we like, which gives us a lot of room to make decisions based on our ISO and our f-stop. If you're not on a tripod and you start to move, I'd say below 60, closer to 30, and even lower than that a second, you'll start to get some camera shake because it will start to see the motion of the light moving around. So it's safe to be on a tripod if you're gonna have those lower shutters, and depending on how bright your window is, what time of day it is, and where you are in the world. So all of these settings cannot necessarily be done with an iPhone, which is another major difference. Let's talk about the lens choice really quick. I'm using a prime lens. It's a 56mm on a mirrorless crop sensor. So really that's more like an 80-85 type of DSLR lens. I have to step back a little bit because it's not necessarily a macro lens. For detailed shots, you would want a sort of macro lens or a long lens where you can kind of zoom in and you can check that focus to get more detailed shots. We'll talk more about compositions in the next lesson. You can also use a 35mm, a 50mm, an 85mm. Really just finding your style and what you got is the best way to go about these things. Kit lenses for Canons or Nikons, you can find a cheaper 35mm or 50mm lens online, and they look really great and add a lot of depth of field for your food photography. So if you don't have a mirrorless or DSLR camera with interchangeable lenses, you can always shoot with your smartphone and still get a quality photo. You'll have more options with the bigger cameras, but you're always able to shoot with any camera you have. In the next lesson, we're going to aim at different compositions and how to position yourself to shoot your food. There's four major angles that I always try to shoot when I'm shooting food. There's this angle, which is kind of a 45-degree angle, which is always the one I end up using. There's a flat angle, or more of like a hero shot, that's more on the level of the food. So that's really going to depend on your background. And then what's getting really popular nowadays too is the overhead shot, and we'll try those. And then there's also detail shots. So let's go ahead and start with the 45-degree angle shot. So here I'm kind of just at my normal stance. I'm about 5'7", and I'm looking right at the food. And it's kind of exactly what we've been shooting and what we've seen. I'm gonna back up just a little bit. We've taken out our negative fill so that we can kind of show you our compositions and you can see everything. So this is much more about compositionally. Got our settings going, and let's snap away. So the cool thing about this shot is, again, you've been watching this throughout the lessons, but you see kind of all the details. The background has really become just the table itself, and we're focused on how you would normally sit at a table and eat. It looks a lot more appetizing, and it's a little more nice to people that they've seen this image before every day of their lives. So let's talk about kind of our hero shot. This is more on the level here. It's not gonna work as well for a salad, but check out these other shots where it's right on the level. You're able to see more of the actual food itself because it's kind of protruding and not in a bowl or a plate. I'll show you with the salad. What we would normally do would be finding a background, and for us, remember that kitchen in the background? We're gonna use that as kind of our we're in the home, we're in the kitchen, which is a great thing to do if you don't have a background like a backdrop or like a wood plank or something you could do. Just use your kitchen or your house or something in the background that will be way out of focus. So let's step back. We're gonna be on the level of the food. We're gonna get back to our normal settings, focus on our salad. So you can see this is really incorporating our style and everything that we have in the background. We have our fork and our napkin, and the food is front and center. We can see it. I think I might actually, for this, rotate the toast and do it again because I want to be able to still see the toast and still gain that look. Right. So here, the toast is rotated. We can see it a little bit better, and the food is right front and center. What a good looking salad. So now let's do the overhead shot. I'm still using my 56mm on my crop sensor camera, and that's still around an 80, 85. So I'm gonna get on a chair to see how high I can get and see if I can still capture what I'm trying to get. If you have a zoom lens, you might be able just to get up here and zoom out a little bit. If you have a bigger tripod, you might also be able to achieve this. Luckily, my screen pops out a little bit, so I'm able to just center it. So the best thing to do is just, our table's a little small, so you can still see our kind of settings there, our toast and our salad is there. We'll take a shot. And I would probably add in some negative fill or some bounce for my style, and you can just pull that right up like we did before. I try to center the plate as much as I can because that's really the main focus of what we're trying to do. And there you go. And that's an overhead shot. You probably see these on Instagram a lot. It's getting a little bit more popular, and it's really nice because you really see the layout and the lines of everything. And most things are going to be in focus because they're all on the same level, right? So check out these other shots with these other foods. You can see how you can see the circles, the lines. It's appetizing, it's interesting. It kind of is a good menu item. So depending on what you're using with your food, you can show these kind of anywhere. So for the fourth composition is detailed shots. Now this lens I've been using, my 56mm, I know right off the bat, it does not get me that close a focus. So I'm gonna change it to my kit lens, which is something you guys all probably got with your cameras. And this one's actually kind of a cheaper 55 to 18. This will allow me to get closer detailed shots. Now you can see the light keeps going in and out, and our video is having a little bit of trouble too. Because the sun is going in and out and there's clouds, you just kind of have to stay on top of your game and pay attention to your settings and adjust accordingly. So let's get up close. You can see already I'm losing some light, so I'm gonna ISO up or slow my shutter down a little bit just to achieve these detailed shots. And here, depending on what you're doing, I'm just gonna get a nice close-up shot of the food, the detail, and everything I can. The bread as well. And you never know if you're shooting this for a client or if you're shooting it for a blog or just to show on Instagram, you always want options to show. Sometimes when I'm shooting for a client too, I'll shoot the vinegar and oil or the fork or the tomatoes, just stuff that really like kind of accents the whole mood, because you never know what you're gonna be using this for depending on what you're doing. If you already know what you're using this for, you wanna make sure to get those detailed shots and the shots you need specifically. All right, so that's all our compositions. Remember all four: 45 degrees, hero, overhead, and details. Between those four, you should be able to cover your entire food for any reason or anything you need, whether it be menus, blogs, Instagrams, just for fun, postcards, whatever you really need. So just remember to keep your options open, keep your eyes open, and use your compositions in tandem with what we taught about lighting. Try to figure out where you want your composition to be, and then bring in that neg fill, bring in that bounce card, and try and work around. And it's a delicate balance of finding that correct, perfect shot.
Hey everyone, this is Phil, the man behind the camera for the rest of this course. Today I'm going to walk you through editing your food photography. I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible so that whatever photo editing software you're using, you'll be able to understand the 3 key points and the 3 key things to do with your photos. I basically pare it down to crop, color, and exposure. So with cropping, we're just going to adjust the way that the photo is composed using cropping. With color, we're going to change the saturation of our food to make it look more colorful. And in the last part, we're going to expose properly, changing whether we want it to make it brighter, darker, or parts of the image brighter or darker. So here I'm in Lightroom, and Again, I'm going to try to teach this in a way that whatever program you're using, you'll understand. Whether you're using Lightroom, Photoshop, iPhoto, on your iPhone, on your Android, there are usually features to crop. There's usually features to change the exposure and change the saturation. And that's pretty much all I'm going to be doing. Later on, I'm going to talk about a special few features that Lightroom has that your editor might have that are cool to play around with. But for now, let's start with crop. This is the photo of the salad that Will took in the very beginning. And we can scroll through some of these and see. Let me find one that is actually another one that I would do more cropping on, because Will did a really good job composing this image actually. So say I take this one and I can open up my crop feature, and this opens up my crop module where I can basically zoom in, zoom out, rotate slightly. Say we did want to just zoom in a little bit more on this salad, make sure that it's in the center of our frame, because before when we were zoomed out all the way, it was actually a little bit over to the left of our frame. So we're just going to zoom in to make sure that this is directly in the center. Maybe put it down at the bottom a little bit so that the salad that's actually in focus is in the middle. You don't necessarily always want what you shot to be in the direct center, but for this photo, I do. So I'm going to crop it that way just by using the crop tool, zooming in a little bit, and pressing return on my keyboard. Okay, so I'm happy with my crop. The next thing I'm going to do is skip down to color or saturation. So I have this saturation bar right here. And again, whatever you're using, you might have a little bar, some numbers that you can increase or decrease. And if I increase this all the way, you'll see what happens. Wow, that is way too saturated, but it gives you the point that I'm trying to make, that this bar helps you desaturate or increase the saturation. You can also plug in numbers specifically if you have a number in mind. So I would just look at your photo and see, does it need a little bit more color? Will's camera, the settings, the raw settings that he's using, typically it will need a little bit of a boost in saturation on his Fuji camera. If you're using an iPhone or a smartphone, it usually adds a bit of contrast and good saturation that you might not need to increase. You don't want it to look unnatural, but you do want the colors to come across through your photos. And just this, compared to, if I bring up the comparison, the right compared to the left, it looks a little bit more bright, inviting, colorful, and tasty. So boosting that saturation can help. The last thing I'm going to do is play with the exposure. And this is where the beauty of shooting in raw file mode helps, because the shadows and the brights of your image can really be manipulated. On most photo editors, there's going to be an exposure bar where you can just increase or decrease the exposure of the overall picture. So what this is doing, it's brightening up every single part of my photo or darkening it. And this is good because sometimes if you are running a blog or putting photos in a magazine, a lot of food photos are very, very bright. Now, Will loves the more contrasted, a little bit darker photos, but I actually tend to like some more brighter photos, and it's really your style. It depends on what you want to do. So with this bar, as I mentioned, you can increase or decrease this overall exposure of the whole image. Down below, we can actually change the exposure of different parts of our images. So here we have our highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, and you might have something like this on your photo editor as well. For example, if I take my blacks and I increase the blacks, you can see that it's really just affecting the darker parts of this image. So these shadows under the plates, under the leaves of the lettuce, this dark of the pepper back there. So if I increase or decrease that, you can really see what's happening over here on the left, this vinegar that's really darkening. And if you do want to add contrast to your photo, you can do it that way by decreasing the blacks and then increasing the whites or the highlights. Contrast is basically how dark your darks are and how bright your brights are. And usually having a more contrasty image will make your food look a little bit better, a little bit more appetizing. And again, that's what Will was doing in person live when he was using the black negative fill foam board. versus the white bounce card. That's what he was doing live in person, but you can also do that kind of thing in post in terms of just adding some contrast. I can also play with the shadows, which are not as dark as the blacks. It's kind of the mid-range darks. It's from the middle grays to not quite black, and then the highlights, which are brights, but not necessarily white. So I can, if I boost this, it's controlling some of the whites in this salt and the plate. And so boosting that might make it look a little bit better too. So if I look again at the comparison, I can do some different comparison views. You can see here on the right, very bright, colorful, nice, appealing. On the left, it's a little bit duller, but again, it starts from the very first image that you shot with. So let me just reset this. So I'm just going to undo original photo, then to our final photo. Hopefully you can see the difference, and this one hopefully you think is a lot better. So let's move on to some more professional advanced techniques that you can consider doing for your images. I think I'm going to go over to my key lime tart. So let's take one of these key lime tarts. This has some greens in it, but the greens aren't that vibrant. Now, I want to make the colors more vibrant, and I could just take the saturation and boost the saturation a lot. But what happens is that the saturation of the orange and the yellows in this tart itself get boosted. The saturation of the browns and everything else gets saturated as well. What if I just want to boost the greens? Well, in Lightroom, what you can do is go down to these HSL color and black and white module down here. I can actually take this color picker right here, or by going down to the green slider down here, but I'm going to use the color picker. And then I take the color picker, I go over to my image, I select the color that I want to affect, and I click and drag up or down. Now, if I drag all the way down, you can see what happens. It takes away the color of just the greens and the yellows that I'm picking right now. But if I boost it, it really increases that green without increasing the yellows and the oranges of this tart. Now, if I select this tart and I want to boost that color, I can do that. Maybe I'll just take a little bit of the yellow right in the middle of the tart and boost that. And so that's a way that you can boost the colors of a specific object. If I go over to my soup, for example, let's go back to our soup photo. And I do it here, so I take my saturation and I go to my red. I can really boost or decrease the saturation of my red without affecting the greens. Or maybe I want the greens to pop out a little more. So I'll decrease the reds, make those greens pop out. Maybe the greens I want to desaturate a little bit, and so that the reds pop a little bit more. So you can pick a specific color that you want to increase or decrease the saturation of. Now, with all of this, you don't want to go crazy because you don't want it to be unnatural. You want your colors to look appealing and appetizing, and if it looks like it's some sort of color added to it and unnatural, it's not going to look good. One other thing, I wanted to show you the power of shooting raw images. One of the photos that was a little bit dark was this photo of the coffee beans and the coffee. Here, what I would do is go up to my blacks and shadows and boost those. So you can see if I boost my blacks and my shadows, look how much detail comes from the darkness within here. You can see this steam actually coming up from the coffee. Let me zoom in here, and then I will decrease the shadows. If I boost the shadows, you can see the steam in there actually, which is a cool thing to do, and you would only be able to get that detail from the darkness by shooting raw. And again, that's what the difference is between a smartphone photo and a photo shot in raw mode using a professional or prosumer DSLR or mirrorless camera. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to cover with editing your photos. Remember, you want to crop to make sure that your composition is perfect. You want to color and make sure that the saturation looks good and makes your food look appetizing. And then you want to expose and change the exposure of your photo so that it's as bright or dark or contrasted as you want. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, thanks again for taking this course, and we'll see you in the future.
Okay, so Phil made us a nice cup of coffee, and let's take a look at it. And I think here we want to try and tell the story of coffee, or kind of where coffee comes from, or the fact that it's a liquid out of coffee beans. So maybe let's grab some coffee beans, some napkins, see what we can do. All right, so I put some coffee beans in this little bowl. Maybe put this here, and then we've got the roasted bag these came from. Maybe let's put a little bit on the wood. See how that looks. That might look cool if we just spread some out a little bit. I mean, it's all about really texture and kind of finding some detail in it. They kind of get lost in the wood a little bit, so I don't know. We'll see how that looks. And then maybe we'll put the bowl near it so it kind of looks like they're covered. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. Share that space a little bit there, coffee. And then let's leave the bag out here. Maybe we can put this out of focus in the background. I don't really want to advertise for these guys, but here we go. My shot will be there. Take a look. Maybe I'll center it a little bit. Still see the bag, but let's just see if it'll be out of focus. I think that looks good. Maybe let's add like a napkin. Here I got one of our green napkins. It kind of matches the color of the bag, actually. How fortuitous. Kind of like a morning coffee thing. Again, it all really depends on like your style and how you want to present your food and your drinks. It looks nice, it looks fun. So yeah, I'm happy with that. Again, all stuff that we found here, very easy, very quick, looks professional. Let's take our shots. So I'm gonna go ahead, we've lost a bit of light because it's later in the day. The bounce isn't hitting that building outside quite as much, so I'm adjusting my settings a little bit. We'll do our 45 degree. That looks nice. I think it's a little harder contrast-wise because the coffee beans are so dark. So because it's so dark, I'm gonna start with the white bounce. We're getting some more white bounce to fill in those shadows, and because the coffee beans are kind of dark, it's kind of brightening those up, and it's also adding a little reflection on the coffee itself. Great, so you can tell that the white bounce filled in quite a bit. Here, I'll switch it out and put the negative fill so you can kind of see the difference with the same settings. Okay, so here's with our negative fill, our black card. I'm gonna go ahead and take a shot, same camera settings, same composition-ish. Let's take a look. So you can see the white plus thing is adding in quite a bit of light, and it's really getting rid of the shadows, and you can see the beans, and it's a nice bright cup of coffee. The white you kind of lose yourself in because it's so bright. The negative fill looks kind of nice early morning coffee, although we do lose detail in some of the blacks in the beans where you can kind of fix that in editing, and Phil will show you a little bit of that later. But the real cool idea is that you have options, you can change your style, figure out what best works for you. So let's maybe simplify the setting a little bit, and let's see what a different style might look like. Let's simplify and take some stuff out. Let's take out the plate, let's take out the bag. Let's maybe even just turn the cup a little bit, maybe stylize these beans just a little bit more. I like that, but I really don't like the napkin very much. I think it's kind of taken away from the simplicity of it. Let's bring this closer so we can see the background. Let's light come on the little beans. It's okay. I mean, it's a different sort of thing. Maybe let's try rotating this. And let's put the beans on this side where the light's hitting and fill in between. Maybe that'll add a little bit more. Really just about playing with what you've got, seeing what you like the most, now that we've got our lighting set up here. And that's nice. I'd pull this a little bit forward so we can check the background. Awesome. And let's see what that looks like with our white card real quick. Now we got the white card, we're adding fill, getting rid of those shadows. A little brighter, a little more Starbucksy, a little brighter. And again, you can tell the difference between the fill and the neg and the contrast versus a bright image. let me just go around and do our other kind of angles and shots and show you some details, and then we'll move on to the next one. Explains a lot. So these close-up shots I'm doing, the detail shots, I'm using the black negative fill, so you can kind of see more shadows and more detail in the cup and the beans. Also, you can see the wood is still maintaining its texture. I'm going to do some vertical detail shots of the beans. So we got a key lime tart here. You can see it's just a plate, and it's got key lime, and Phil cut this fabulous lime right here that we're gonna put. We took off our cutting board and using this nice wood table. I think the key here is to take a look at this and maybe try and match color, come up with a different background with stuff that we've got here. I know we've got some brown kind of burlappy placemats, and we have that green napkin that we had before, so let's start with that and see what that looks like. And instead of doing the whole thing, we might just try and kind of a little bit of an angle, just to still see some of that wood in there. And then we'll go green, right? Do the same thing. So now we got some colors going on. We got the brown here, green. And then we'll go get our coffee from before, put it in a new glass. See if that stays there. That's just again to accent, grab some brown. We got some limes here, I know. Match those. We got a cut lime. Here, some lime slices, add to this. Again, this is very simple stuff, but still looks great. Adding that green color, trying to stick around this color theme on this one. And then again with the green napkin. See if we can fit that guy in there. I like having forks and utensils. Metal's a little hard because you're worried about reflection and stuff. Very green. This is a little yellow. I wonder what else we can add color-wise. It'd be good to get some color. Got ourselves a lemon. A little bit of an accent here. Work that in there somehow. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's just try and shoot it with a blank frame with just our white diffuse light, and we'll see how it goes. So we'll do our 45-degree shot here first, and I'm just focusing on our main dish. Cool, our main dish looks pretty good. Let's just change a couple things here. Bam, that looks pretty good. Check it out. I am a little unhappy that we're so close to the edge of the table there, so I would say I would move everything forward very carefully. Just a little bit so we can get that edge of the table away. Maybe raise our angle up just a little bit. There we go. Perfect. I'd be pretty happy to share this shot on an Instagram page or anything like that. And again, this is just plain white diffused light coming in with our basic settings that we talked about before. Let's just to see what it looks like, let's add our black negative fill and see how that looks. All right, so I didn't come as low as I normally do. Maybe we should. So this is a little bit more at an angle. Again, I'm coming a little bit lower just to fill out those shadows and the ambience. Similar angle here. Cool. So again, you can see that the main difference is, and I moved the fork a little bit, but the main difference is just adding those contrasty shadows. Makes it look a little bit more contrasty, kind of fills in the black, which makes the front part pop out a little bit more in that photo. I would actually see if I can get this a little bit closer, because this is going to look really nice in those detail shots. So you can see I'm really cutting the light off here. I have to get in here real tight. Cool. So yeah, see my angle changed a little bit, you can see here, but I really like the contrast in the dark. And just so you guys can see, we'll put in the white bounce, and you see a major difference. Now that's definitely a bright dessert. Major difference in contrast, and it's a lot brighter. Again, this is pertaining to what style you want to shoot and what photos you want to represent, or how you want to represent your style of shooting. But again, bright positive versus a negative contrasty fill. So we're here with our tomato soup. We're going to kind of dress it up a little bit. We decided to dress it up while it's here so that we don't have to be shuffling around. So let's let's first decide on where we want to place stuff, and we're gonna still use stuff that we found around the house. So let's figure this out. So tomato soup, obviously some tomatoes I think would look good next to it. We're gonna use our same cutting board because that texture looks great. We got our salt and pepper shakers that we used before. I'll probably move these back a little bit just to add some depth. We got our bread. I might just put that here. We're just kind of trying to stylize it. You know, one thing I don't have is a spoon, but I can run to the kitchen and get that really quick. So I'm using a yellow napkin now. I think that contrasts with the red nicely. Put a spoon there. Pretty similar to our last setup, but a little different. And then now, just because it looks nice, I'm just gonna put some little dollop of sour cream there. It's probably gonna sink. And then Phil grows his basil outside, and just to dress it up just a little bit, we're gonna put those in there. I'm trying to put the green side up. It looks a little prettier. The white will look a little bit better with the contrasting dark soup. But let's do both and let's see how that goes. So again, we still have our diffused light coming from our window. We're putting our white bounce card up as close as we can using our little DIY tape. We're using gaff tape right now, but you can use Scotch tape or masking tape. It's fine, I think it's a little bright, so we'll come down on our shutter. Here's our 45-degree shot. Looks pretty nice. Again, basic stuff, accents around. So hopefully that gets you another better sense of stylizing the background and shooting the actual subject. So after we do that 45-degree shot, we go ahead and do the hero shot, we do the detail shot, and we do the over-the-head shot. So you can see that it's a whole nother style, same stuff, same areas, same lighting setup, and it's just a little bit different. All right, so we're gonna do one of the most classic breakfasts, right? Cereal. So I've got that typical placemat. I'm gonna go back to our table, set this down. I'm gonna go get my bowl of cereal. So here we go. We used a bigger, thicker bowl, and we didn't actually put any milk in it yet. We actually have the milk in the glass, kind of set the stage a little bit. We put a lot of cereal in there. We also bulked up the fruits just in the top. I think the milk, it's good the milk's not in there because they'd float around. All right, so let's add, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm really digging the napkins. And it's good to go get some nice stylized napkins for what you're doing. Spoon, bowl, still need color. Okay. Breakfast, banana. Again, I'm gonna put that closer to the background just to add some color in the background and bring it to light. I might actually move them closer together, pull this forward a little bit. Kind of want to see the inside of that strawberry. Kind of looking at how the light shines against the strawberry, and there's gonna be some blacker contrast right here. All right, here we go. I'm gonna take a shot without our bounce stuff, just see what it looks like, see where we're at. Okay, so our 45-degree, I'm gonna pull this stuff a little bit closer so that we're away from the edge of the table. I don't have to worry about the background as much. Cool. All right, that looks pretty good. Actually, it looks really good. You can still kind of see some of the contrast is not as contrasty as I think I'd like. Again, I'm kind of like the stylistic with the contrast and the darker on one side. Maybe a bright breakfast with the white bounce might be better. Maybe one thing we might try too is just adding some Cheerios in the front here. Oh, too much. Might need to be careful with that. So we can clean it up, stylize some around. Try not to make it look messy, but still appetizing. Let's try that again. There we go. That looks a little bit more fun. Got some Cheerios on the side. So let's try and add in our black negative fill and go through the lighting. Okay, I've got our negative fill kind of closer in there. And bam. So the cool thing about this shot, and having that negative fill, you can really see that it brings in some shape on the spoon, which is really cool. The reflection is actually just the black part. And if you had a bigger, blacker foam core, that will make that shape of the spoon look better. Also, it makes the spots on the strawberries and this side a little bit brighter, which I think make it pop more. Let's try it and see what it looks like with the white bounce, because that might be early morning bright breakfast. So I'm kind of positioning the spoon so that the white is the reflective part as opposed to the black. And that's kind of a trick in reflective things. Car commercials do that quite a bit, actually, using big white bounce surfaces and black bounce surfaces to shape metallic objects. Let's take a picture here. Oh yeah. So this is significantly brighter, and you can tell between the three photos, between the regular bounce, which is the soft, and the ambient, and then the negative fill versus the bright spot. The bright looks actually pretty good and it looks a little more breakfasty, and I think it actually might like that a little bit more better. I also think using the negative or the positive white bounce looks better on the metallic spoon because it's so shapely. That helps a lot make it bounce a little bit more. So let's do our other shots and see what else we can do. So sometimes time is of the essence depending on what kind of food you're shooting. We have a beer here and we're going to pour it, and I want to make sure the foam is perfect at the top. I just know from experience shooting glassware, I'm going to want my black negative fill, and I'm also going to pull this curtain down so that I get harsher light. It's not going to be real harsh light, but it's going to be a lot stronger, a little bit stronger than we've been doing before. So now I know that I can take a look at this and I can see the reflection of the light brought in by the black contrast on the right side, which I think will look great. Make sure that I'm opening that away from your camera. So just see I shook the beer at the end there, and to get that foam, to get the top. But I'm gonna go quick here so that I still get this foam here. I'm gonna move some of these things. I just want a plain beer on a wood top. All right, that looks pretty good. Actually, would probably use a darker wood if I had it. That looks pretty good. While we have it here, let's, since we have another beer, I'm gonna go ahead and add in a darker wood we've been using before, just to give it a little bit more information. I also have this beer here. I'm gonna add in an orange. Again, just trying to tell the story, trying to capture the life and attitude of what we're doing here. A little bit of foam, not a ton. Still looks nice. Take this, get our angle here going. Man, that looks good. Cool. So you could probably get better at pouring a beer, but the object is time and then also trying to know exactly what you want to do light-wise. Now I'll just go in for some detail shots, maybe drink this a little bit, and keep going.